A few weeks ago, someone made the suggestion for me to create a spin-off video on why no one plays, but instead of talking about champions, I talk about things like items, and I thought that was a pretty neat idea because in a competitive game, players are always trying to find the most effective ways to do things. Therefore, the methods or things deemed inefficient are usually ignored in favor of those that are efficient. And so the current rune system in League of Legends has been around for well over 3 years now, as it was added in Preseason 8. Holy crap, it's been 3 years. Jesus. Okay, anyways, as per your suggestions, I suppose it's a good idea to talk about the other gameplay elements of League that are forgotten, and so today we'll be discussing all the underused or never used runes in the game. I was thinking about putting runes and items into one video, but I think it's probably better to keep them separate. We'll talk about the former one for now and the latter one later. League of Legends describes runes as a game mechanic meant to add onto or enhance champion abilities and stats, giving players some semblance of customization alongside their item purchases. This concept is not unlike that of equipment in RPG games, where even if the character might have a set list of skills or attacks, what kind of gear you put on them can nuance their playstyle just enough to give two separate players a totally different experience, but not too different to where it feels like they're playing the same character. Although this wasn't always the case, back in the day there used to be two different systems, runes and masteries. Runes used to be purely stat bonuses such as armor penetration, attack damage, attack speed, armor, health, magic resist to name a few. And the masteries back then are sort of what runes are now. Some of them also just gave stats here and there, while others provided unique effects you'd only be able to witness in-game through that mastery. That would range from dealing more damage while taking more damage, getting a shield whenever using hard crowd control, longer buff duration from Baron, red or blue buffs, stuff like that. Much of the mastery system has actually carried over to modern day runes. For example, Phase Rush is almost identical to Storm Raider's Surge, Grasp of the Undying has the exact same name, Warlord's Bloodlust became Fleet Footwork, so on and so forth. But aside from the keystones, much of both runes and masteries didn't do that much more than just give the champion stats. All of them were pretty much passive boosts. Fast forward to Preseason 8 and beyond, runes exert a lot more influence on a champion's gameplay than ever before, not just the keystone rune. While most of them are still passives, the stats and combat benefits they bring to the table are way more impactful than just having 5 extra AD or 50 more health. For example, the Bounty Hunter line in Domination Tree can give you item cooldown reduction, Omnivamp, bonus movement speed out of combat, or a lower cooldown on your ultimate. In the Sorcery Tree, Nullifying Orb is a mini Hexdrinker shield, or Nimbus Cloak gives you a burst of movement speed when using summoner spells. For the most part, all runes, both keystone and standard runes, have their purpose. Naturally, there are some that are used far more than others, such as Bone Plating being the most desired choice over Second Wind and Conditioning, mostly because of its burst protection. Another one would be Triumph, which owns a huge market share over Presence of Mind and Overheal. Generally speaking though, there's no one rune that's game-breakingly stronger than all the others, so compliments to Riot for getting runes in a nice, comfortable spot. Problem is, there's one keystone in particular that has almost never seen the light of day ever since it was released in Preseason 10, Prototype Omnistone. The most enigmatic rune in the entire game, and likely only 1 in every 10 players know what it actually does. It served to replace the widely controversial Kleptomancy keystone that was undoubtedly a heavy blow to Gangplank, Kayle, Kennen, Ezreal, Vladimir, etc. To give you a brief description on it, Omnistone allows you to use basically every keystone in a single game, although only one at a time. When that keystone is successfully activated, it switches to a different one within a few seconds. I should also mention that Omnistone does function off of an algorithm, so it has a higher chance to give you a certain keystone based on the situation you're in. For instance, if you're near a low health enemy champion, you're more likely to get Dark Harvest, or if you're constantly in combat with champions, you're less likely to get Predator, since that's more of an out of combat engage rune, things like that. Lastly, the souls you pick up from Dark Harvest permanently enhance your other runes, such as Conqueror giving more adaptive force the more souls you have, or Press the Attack doing more proc damage. At first glance, it sounds pretty appealing. After all, it would be cool to have access to runes in-game whenever you need them, not to mention the late-game scaling Dark Harvest offers all your other keystones, which you'd never have access to if you just chose the original one. Yet, no one ever seems to field this rune except for those very rare occasions where someone's probably autofilled and playing a champion they don't know how to play. And most people would immediately jump to the answer of randomness. In a competitive game, RNG is something you rarely want to see if ever, because in theory, victory and defeat should come at the hands of each player's skill, not through random chance. Fundamentally speaking, yes, that's the main reason people don't use Omnistone. But Klepto was also based on random chance, yet that one saw an insane amount of play across a ton of champions. So what gives? While it may not seem obvious at first, not all random number generations are created equal. There's a vast difference between Klepto's randomness and Omnistone's randomness. Having RNG in a game is not necessarily a bad thing, and not having it is not necessarily a good thing. The beauty of luck-based mechanics is that it opens up unpredictability, which allows players a whole new set of experiences that would otherwise not exist. In League of Legends, there's actually a place for RNG, and I'm not just talking about crit chance. The most notable example is the Dragon. As you know, Summoner's Rift can transform into 4 different rifts based on what the 3rd elemental Drake will be, requiring players to be somewhat mindful of what kind of battlefield they'll be in. Yet despite the randomness of this game event, players generally don't seem to feel too bothered by it. This is an example of well-designed randomness where it only serves to provide players with a neutral or better outcome, not so much a negative one. Although, there are instances where champions like Rengar may not appreciate the loss of brushes in a Fire Dragon Rift, but then again it balances out whenever they get a Water Dragon Rift. That's an edge case. For most champions, the changes to the Rift based on the element are just something that tweaks their gameplay infinitesimally. Overall though, that randomness led to a guaranteed outcome, the Dragon Soul and subsequent Elder Dragon buff. No matter what order of dragons you came across, having any of the 4 Dragon Souls was a huge benefit to a team, the Elder Dragon even more so. Kleptomancy bears the same properties. Every time you used an ability, your next 2 basic attacks gave you bonus gold or a chance to receive a consumable item. This could be something small like a tiny health potion, or something huge like an elixir of skill, which lets you level up an ability early. Meaning if you got 2 elixirs of skill in a match, you would have all 4 abilities maxed out by level 16 instead of 18, a huge power advantage to have. And even if luck wasn't on your side, there was a method to Klepto's madness. Its purpose wasn't to give you a power advantage over your opponent, it was to give you lane safety and gold advantage, allowing you to purchase items much faster than your lane opponent, assuming neither of you achieved any kills or assists. This was possible because of the bonus gold on hit as well as the sly stack of gold, which gave you more money, and you would almost always get about 3 or 4 of these by 10 minutes. Some games you would get lucky and get a whole bunch of good items, others you would not. Either way, in an average game, you would be able to outpace your lane opponent in gold generation, while also having access to potions and stuff to keep you healthy in lane, which is why champions with often weak early games like Vladimir, Kayle, and Gangplank would prefer to take this rune. Prototype Omnistone, on the other hand, doesn't have a guaranteed outcome. While Dark Harvest augments the bonus stats or damage of your other keystone, and you have a higher chance of getting a keystone appropriate for whatever situation you're in, Omnistone has no end goal, no destination to it. For the entire game, you're getting nothing but random keystones. That is the first thing wrong with this rune. There's no pity system or safety net that promises you at least something good for choosing this rune. Kleptomancy's safety net was that it at least gave you gold, which any champion would be more than happy to have. Problem number 2 with Omnistone is that most champions in the game have only 1 or 2 keystone runes that actually work on them. There's almost no champion in League who can tactically weaponize even half of all keystones in the game, let alone all of them. On a champion like Ahri, you're not going to get much out of Lethal Tempo or Conqueror, meaning half the time you're stuck with a useless rune. And even if you do play a champion who can use multiple runes, such as Hecarim, who can probably make use of Conqueror, Predator, Phase Rush, and Aftershock, 1 rune in each tree, you might get unlucky and enter a team fight with Arcane Comet, completely ruining your consistency. Omnistone's main issue is that the downside of being RNG screwed is not made up for in any particular way. For Kleptomancy, you essentially surrender a combat rune, which is a huge trade-off, but in exchange, you're allowed to have a much safer lane with more curative items while transitioning into your core build much faster than your opponent, which should make up for the loss of a rune, but Omnistone doesn't have that extra benefit. There's no 1 step back, 2 steps forward kind of deal. It feels like 2 steps back, 1 step forward actually. In order for the random rune selection to be viable, it has to have a far better payoff than just potentially having access to any rune. Perhaps players might be more inclined to go Omnistone if they get access to 2 keystones simultaneously. After all, imagine a champion like Master Yi having both Hail of Blades and Lethal Tempo, or a Zed with both Electrocute and Dark Harvest, or a Darius with both Phase Rush and Conquer. It would still be balanced by the fact that you have to get lucky enough to get the right pair of keystones, but I doubt there's any combo of 2 that isn't at least usable. For example, if you were playing once again Hecarim and getting Summon Aerie and Grasp of the Undying together, sure, that may not be the most ideal combo, but 2 underwhelming keystones can combine together to form 1 average keystone. And then you only have to wait a few seconds for a reroll anyway. Again, this is mostly just conjecture, but it doesn't feel like a worthwhile deal. So that's about it for Omnistone. Let's quickly move on to the minor runes that aren't used frequently before ending the video, starting with Ghost Poro. What makes this rune not as appealing as Eyeball Collection and Zombie Ward is that it simply takes too long to fully stack up. all 3 of the stacking runes in Domination have that same sort of mechanic. By completing X objective, you gain bonus adaptive force up to 10 times and then receive an extra bonus at max stacks. Eyeball collection stacks upon champion takedowns, so by reaching a combination of 10 kills or assists, you fully max out. Zombie ward stacks upon destroying wards, which if you're carrying an oracle lens you can max out very quickly. But Ghost Poro stacking is based on when your wards expire, not get destroyed, expire. You have to place down 10 wards and have them last their full duration without getting cleared by the enemy team in order to get 10 of them. Now, getting 10 wards on the map takes a long time for anyone without a support item, and chances are you can clear out 10 of the enemy wards faster than 10 of your own burning out, so it's essentially an infinitely worse version of Zombie Ward. Gathering Storm is in a similar vein where compared to Scorch and Water Walking, it simply takes too long to do anything. If you watched a good number of my Why No One Plays videos, you'll know that most games end very quickly these days, with more forfeit 15s than we've ever seen in all of League's history. Even at 10 minutes, Gathering Storm only gives you 5 attack damage or 8 ability power, which is barely half a long sword or an amp tome. Not to mention, Scorch and Water Walking are both damage runes, with Scorch doing more damage upon landing an ability, and Water Walking giving stats and bonus movement speed in the river, which is where a lot of fights happen because of Dragon, Baron, and Scuttlecrab skirmishes, not to mention the faster tempo. Gathering Storm only really takes off past 30 minutes, but by then, everyone's at 5 items, so 20 to 30 AD doesn't make too much of a difference at that point. It mostly comes down to execution. For the most part, it's a dead rune in this early game focused era of League, which is likely not going to change anytime soon. Futures Market, that's a funny one because it essentially gives you free gold starting 2 minutes. The problem is, it's not enough gold. 150 to start with and you get 5 extra gold per minute, which is barely a minion. The idea behind Futures Market was to allow people to basically take a payday loan to get their first item power spike quickly. On paper, that doesn't sound all too bad since there's a massive difference between a completed item and the sum of its components. But for the most part, Biscuit Delivery is just too good to pass up for any champion that uses mana, because not only does it restore a portion of your missing health and mana, but it also gives you permanent max mana, a free 150, which is like 2 or 3 more ability casts. Now, some of you might say, why not just buff it to give it more gold? See, here's the thing. If they brought it to like 300 gold at the start and 10 gold per minute, everyone, and I repeat, everyone would go Futures Market. Those of you who play Yu-Gi-Oh! And just know absolutely how broken Pot of Greed is, even though no one has any idea what it does, will know how obscenely overpowered having a resource advantage is. Most people get their first completed item by around 10 to 12 minutes. This rune will let you get it by 8. There would basically be no reason you choose any other rune in the entire game. And lastly, Minion Dematerializer. So for context, this rune was actually extremely popular back in the day, but then it got nerfed to the ground. Minion Demat was a usual choice for supports or mages because it made clearing cannon minions so much easier, and obviously early on, cannons can take a lot of hits to CS. And this was also the easiest way to counter Banner of Command minions back in the day, which was arguably the second most cancerous meta to ever exist aside from the Dread and Ardent Censor. For champions with lackluster wave clear, this was a good choice to pick up since you didn't need to spend your precious mana to push cannon waves. Nowadays, after its nerfs, it just doesn't provide a practical enough benefit to be used over, once again, Biscuit Delivery. I honestly think if it was reverted back to how it was on release, it wouldn't be all too bad anymore since Banner of Command is gone. Minion Demat as a whole just wasn't overpowered, really, it was more of a convenience than anything else. So that's about it for today. I know I spent a lot of time rambling about Omnistone, but I had a lot to say about it and wanted to give you proper context. Let me know what you think can be done to fix Omnistone to actually be worth using, because in its current state, it's arguably worse than even non-keystone runes. If you enjoyed this video, a rating would be much appreciated, and if you'd like to see more content like this, consider subbing to the channel. Also, check out the video description down below for links to my Discord and social media, as well as a playlist containing all of my discussion videos if you want to watch more. But for now, that's going to be it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for the next one. Take care.